This is highly irregular, Director Walsh, Elias Morgan said, scanning the document before him with growing disbelief. I wasn't informed about receiving an alien assistant. Director Walsh, a severe woman with prematurely gray hair pulled into a tight bun, raised an eyebrow. That's because the decision was made this morning, Morgan. The Zolarans insist their diplomatic staff gain practical experience in human government operations. You've been selected to host one. Elias ran a hand through his dark hair, disheveled from a long night preparing budget proposals. With all due respect, my department handles sensitive intelligence analysis. Is this prudent? The Zolaran assigned to you has top security clearance from both governments, Walsh replied, sliding another document across the desk. Besides, you've been complaining about your workload for months. Consider this your solution. Before Elias could formulate another objection, the office door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The being that entered moved with unsettling grace, as though gravity had a gentler hold on her form. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, she had luminescent indigo skin that seemed to shimmer under the office lighting. Her eyes, entirely silver with no visible pupils, blinked horizontally rather than vertically. Analyst Morgan, this is Administrative Assistant Talia, Director Walsh said. Talia, this is Elias Morgan, your new supervisor. Greetings, Analyst Morgan. Talia's voice had an unusual harmonic quality, as though two voices spoke in perfect synchronization. I am pleased to be assigned to your department. I have studied your government's administrative procedures extensively. Elias stood, extending his hand before remembering the cultural briefing about Zolaran contact protocols. He awkwardly retracted it. Welcome to Earth Intelligence Division 6, Talia. I wasn't expecting you. Most humans do not expect us, she replied with what might have been humor. It causes interesting physiological responses. Your pulse has increased by approximately 28%. Walsh smiled thinly. I'll leave you two to get acquainted. Morgan, Talia's living quarters will be in the diplomatic wing. Her species requires only 4 hours of regenerative state daily, so expect increased productivity. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. And Morgan? This assignment is non-negotiable. When the door closed, Elias gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please, sit. I apologize for the lack of preparation. This is my first interaction with a Zolaran. Talia folded her long limbs gracefully into the chair. Your apology is unnecessary but appreciated. This will be a mutual learning experience. Over the next 3 weeks, Elias found himself increasingly impressed by Talia's efficiency. She processed reports at triple human speed, identified patterns in data that had eluded his team for months, and somehow reorganized the entire filing system during what humans would consider a lunch break. Her peculiarities were manageable. The temperature in his office now remained precisely 64 degrees, his coffee appeared on his desk at exactly 7-minute intervals, and all his pens were arranged by wavelength rather than color. He'd grown accustomed to her occasional bioluminescence when she concentrated deeply. What he couldn't adjust to was how his entire department now functioned with unprecedented efficiency, and how everyone except him seemed terrified of her. She's just intense, his colleague Jake explained when Elias questioned him. Those silver eyes don't blink enough. And haven't you noticed how she watches you? She's an assistant. She's supposed to be attentive, Elias replied. Jake shook his head. Not like that, man. Not like that. It wasn't until the following Tuesday that Elias noticed the change. Talia arrived wearing an ornate silver circlet around her brow that hadn't been part of her usual attire. Her skin seemed to pulse with deeper hues of indigo, and she stood even closer to him during their morning briefing. Is everything all right, Talia? He asked when she placed his coffee directly into his hand rather than on the desk, her fingers lingering against his. Everything is functioning within acceptable parameters, Analyst Morgan, she replied, but her voice carried a new timbre that sent an inexplicable shiver down his spine. "Though I would not object to discussing certain protocol adjustments in private." "Protocol adjustments?" Elias repeated, finding himself unable to break eye contact with Talia's silvery gaze. "What kind of adjustments did you have in mind?" Talia stepped closer, the subtle scent of something like cinnamon and ozone emanating from her. "I believe our working relationship would benefit from increased proximity during analytical processes. My species shares neural pathways more efficiently through direct contact." Before Elias could respond, his office door opened as Director Walsh entered with 3 representatives from the Interstellar Relations Committee. Talia immediately stepped back, her posture straightening. "Morgan, we need the Vorlex trade analysis immediately," Walsh said, then paused, studying Talia. Her eyes narrowed. "Is your assistant wearing ceremonial regalia?" Elias glanced at the silver circlet adorning Talia's forehead. "Aye. It is a traditional marker of my efficiency cycle," Talia interjected. "Nothing that will interfere with my duties." That evening, Elias was reviewing security protocols when Talia entered his office without knocking, something she had never done before. Her skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that cascaded down her arms. "You're working late," he observed. "As are you," she replied, moving behind his chair. "Your musculature shows signs of tension." Without warning, her long fingers began massaging his shoulders with surprising strength. "This will improve your circulation and cognitive function." Elias froze, shocked by the unprofessional contact. Yet he couldn't deny the immediate relief spreading through his tense muscles. "Talia, this isn't standard protocol. Efficiency requires flexibility in interpretation of protocol," she murmured, her voice carrying that strange new resonance that seemed to vibrate directly through his spine. The next day at the Interstellar Trade Conference, things escalated dramatically. Talia shadowed Elias more closely than ever, positioning herself between him and any female delegates who approached. During his presentation, she continuously adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, and once even brushed a non-existent hair from his cheek, all while staring challengingly at the female Centaurian ambassador. When Ambassador Lee from the Asian coalition leaned close to whisper a question in Elias's ear, Talia's skin flashed brilliant cobalt. She stepped forward, emitting a sound like harmonizing crystal glasses. "You will maintain appropriate distance from Analyst Morgan," she stated firmly, her silver eyes flashing. The room fell silent. Ambassador Lee stepped back, eyebrows raised. "Talia," Elias hissed, mortified. "Outside. Now." In the hallway, he confronted her. "What was that? You just violated about 15 diplomatic protocols." She was attempting to establish dominance through proximity, Talia said, her circlet now glowing faintly. "It is unacceptable." She was asking about tariff exceptions. Her pheromone levels indicated interest beyond tariffs, Talia replied, her normally perfect posture now rigid. "I cannot permit such advances during my season." Elias blinked. "Your season?" At that moment, Dr. Nathan Okafor, the government's xenobiology specialist, rounded the corner. Upon seeing Talia, he stopped abruptly. "Oh," he said, eyes widening at her glowing circlet and pulsing skin. "Oh my. Morgan, you need to get her out of public immediately." "What's happening to her?" Elias demanded as they escorted a surprisingly compliant Talia to the medical facility. Dr. Okafor closed the examination room door before explaining. "Your assistant is in her mating cycle." "The Zalaran delegation didn't warn you?" "No one said anything about mating cycles," Elias replied, heat rising to his face. "It happens every 7 years. Her species forms intense pair bonds during this period. The circlet is their cultural marker indicating availability." Dr. Okafor looked uncomfortable. The fact that she's wearing it around you and displaying territorial behavior suggests she's selected you. Elias stared at him. That can't be right. I'm human. Zalarans bond based on intellectual compatibility, not species, Dr. Okafor explained. And apparently, she finds you quite compatible. So what happens now? Dr. Okafor grimaced. Either you help her through this cycle, or we arrange immediate transport back to her homeworld. Though I should warn you, Zalarans consider rejection during season to be deeply traumatic. Elias looked through the observation window at Talia, who sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on him while beautiful patterns of light pulsed across her indigo skin. She never even asked me, he murmured. In her culture, the selection itself is the question, Dr. Okafor replied. And every interaction you've had since she donned that circlet has been her way of asking. The Zalaran embassy provided Elias with a thick manual entitled Biological Imperatives and Cultural Considerations, a human guide to Zalaran seasonal bonds. He'd been reading it for hours in his apartment when his doorbell rang. Talia stood in the hallway, no longer in her government uniform but wearing flowing silver garments that complemented her indigo skin. Her circlet remained, now interwoven with luminescent crystal threads. You should not be here, Elias said, though he stepped aside to let her in. The embassy recommended distance while I consider options. Distance is inefficient, she replied, her harmonious voice softer than usual. And potentially harmful at this stage. She moved to his window, staring out at the cityscape. You fear I have not chosen you rationally. That my biology compels me toward any compatible intellect. The thought had crossed my mind, Elias admitted. Talia turned, her silver eyes reflecting the city lights. I have worked alongside 47 humans since arriving on Earth. I have encountered 813 in various capacities. She stepped closer. Only you registered as compatible on all neural frequencies. Despite himself, Elias felt oddly flattered. The manual says this begins with a resonance ceremony. What exactly does that entail? For the first time, Talia appeared hesitant. It is an exchange of personal truths. A neural synchronization. Her bioluminescence dimmed slightly. I understand if you wish me reassigned. My season will pass eventually, though the connection already initiated will leave permanent neural pathways. Elias found himself studying the fascinating patterns rippling across her skin. I didn't say no, Talia. I just need to understand what I'm agreeing to. Her bioluminescence brightened immediately. Then I am permitted to begin the resonance? When he nodded, she approached slowly, raising her hands to frame his face without quite touching him. The air between them seemed to vibrate with energy. Close your eyes, she instructed. When her fingertips finally made contact with his temples, Elias gasped. Images flooded his mind, vast crystalline cities on a world with twin moons, the feeling of swimming through something like liquid starlight, complex mathematical equations that somehow translated as music. This is your world, he whispered. Your memories. Yes, her voice echoed both aloud and somehow inside his mind. Now share yours. Instinctively, he focused on his own memories, childhood summers by a lake, the pride of his first government position, the crushing pressure of responsibility, moments of loneliness in his apartment despite his prestigious career. When Talia finally lowered her hands, Elias opened his eyes to find her silver ones filled with something like tears, though they glimmered like mercury. You have been alone, she said softly. As have I. The next morning, Elias woke to find his living room transformed. Crystalline structures hung from his ceiling, refracting morning light into rainbow patterns across the walls. In the kitchen, Talia was preparing something that smelled wonderful. What is all this? He asked, gesturing at the crystals. Bonding space, she explained, offering him a cup of something that wasn't quite coffee but tasted better. temporary adjustments to harmonize our environments. Is it unacceptable? He studied her hopeful expression. No. It's actually beautiful. Over the following days, they established a strange new routine. At work, they maintained professional distance, though anyone observant would notice how their movements had synchronized, how they anticipated each other's needs without words, how Talia's skin brightened whenever Elias entered a room. In private, the resonance ceremonies continued, each exchange deepening their connection. Elias found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced aloud, while learning the complex harmonic language of Talia's people. When her fingers traced patterns on his skin, they left trails of tingling warmth that lingered for hours. After 2 weeks of this delicate dance, Director Walsh summoned Elias to her office. "The Zolaran ambassador has requested a meeting with both of us," she said without preamble. "Apparently, there's a significant cultural development involving your assistant." Elias swallowed hard. "I can explain." "Save it for the meeting," Walsh interrupted. "Just tell me one thing, has this affected your work performance?" Elias thought about the past 2 weeks. His department's efficiency had increased by 40%. His own anxiety had decreased significantly. The connection with Talia had somehow made him better at his job, more intuitive with data patterns, more decisive. "It has affected my performance," he admitted. "But not in the way you might think." The Zolaran ambassador, Valeri, towered over both humans in Director Walsh's office. His indigo skin was darker than Talia's, etched with what Elias now recognized as status markings. The crystalline staff he carried hummed faintly, resonating with the building's electrical systems. "A seasonal bond with a human was not anticipated in our cultural exchange protocols," Ambassador Valeri stated, his dual-toned voice echoing in the small office. "However, once initiated, such bonds are considered sacred and inviolable under Zolaran law." Director Walsh pinched the bridge of her nose. "Ambassador, with all due respect, we cannot have alien mating rituals disrupting government operations." "The resonance is not merely a mating ritual," the ambassador corrected. "It is a neural quantum entanglement protected by 3 interstellar treaties your government has signed." Elias cleared his throat. "If I may, Talia and I have maintained professional conduct at work. Our personal relationship has not interfered with our duties." "Personal relationship?" Walsh repeated, her eyebrows shooting up. "Morgan, are you telling me you've actually participated in these alien bonding ceremonies?" Before he could respond, the door opened and Dr. Okafor entered with a senior official from the State Department whom Elias recognized as Undersecretary Patel. "Director, we've just received notice that the Zolaran High Council has classified analyst Morgan as a protected cultural asset," Patel announced, looking harried. "They're invoking Article 7 of the Proxima Centauri Accord." "They're what?" Walsh demanded. Ambassador Valeri inclined his head. "When a Zolaran forms a seasonal bond, both partners are extended equal protection under our laws. Analyst Morgan is now legally recognized as Talia's bondmate and entitled to diplomatic status within Zolaran territories." "This is unprecedented," Undersecretary Patel said. "We have no protocol for a human government employee entering a recognized alien partnership." Dr. Okafor adjusted his glasses. "Actually, the biological aspects are fascinating. Initial scans show analyst Morgan's neural pathways have already begun adapting to Zolaran patterns. The resonance appears to have enhanced certain cognitive functions." Elias shifted uncomfortably as everyone turned to look at him. "I didn't expect this level of diplomatic attention." "Of course not," Ambassador Valeri said. "But surely you understood the significance when you accepted Talia's resonance offering?" In truth, Elias had understood very little at the beginning. What had started as curiosity and compassion had evolved into something he couldn't fully explain, a connection that transcended physical attributes or cultural differences. "I understood that Talia chose me," he said finally. "And that I chose to accept." Director Walsh sighed heavily. Morgan, you realize this complicates your security clearance, your position, possibly your entire career? With respect, Director, Undersecretary Patel interjected, the State Department views this differently. A human in a recognized bond with a Zalaran representative could facilitate unprecedented diplomatic integration. If handled properly, this could be an asset. Ambassador Valeri nodded approvingly. The High Council shares this perspective. We propose formalizing Analyst Morgan and Talia's status as the first official human Zalaran bonded diplomatic unit. When Elias returned to his apartment that evening, he found Talia waiting anxiously, her bioluminescence fluctuating with stress patterns. They are reassigning you, she stated before he could speak. Separating us. No, he replied, taking her hands. Her skin felt warmer than usual, the subtle electric current that always surrounded her more pronounced. They're creating a new position for us. Together. Her silver eyes widened. They accept our bond? More than that. They want to formalize it, make us official representatives of human Zalaran relations. He smiled wryly. Apparently, we're now a diplomatic precedent. Talia's skin rippled with patterns he recognized as joy. Then we may complete the final resonance without interference. Elias hesitated. The final resonance, that's the one the manual was vague about? It is difficult to translate into human terms, she admitted. The completion involves a permanent neural synchronization. Our minds will remain partially connected even at distance. Her head tilted. Is this unacceptable to you? Elias considered what this meant. A permanent connection to another being's consciousness would have terrified him weeks ago. Now, the thought of losing the partial connection they already shared seemed far worse. No, he said softly. It's not unacceptable. It's actually what I want. The joy patterns across her skin intensified to a brilliant glow as she stepped forward to embrace him. 6 months later, Elias stood beside Talia on the observation deck of the newly constructed Interspecies Diplomatic Center. Below them, human and Zalaran architects were putting finishing touches on what would become the first jointly operated government facility on Earth. Hard to believe this all started with a routine government assignment, he mused, absent-mindedly tracing the silver band around his wrist, the human-adapted version of Talia's circlet, marking their completed bond. Talia's fingers intertwined with his, a subtle current of shared thoughts flowing between them. Through their permanent connection, he sensed her contentment mingled with excitement about the day's ceremony. The concept of routine is illusion, she replied, her dual-toned voice carrying the harmonic inflection he now recognized as affection. Potential for significance exists in all encounters. Elias smiled. She still occasionally spoke in the philosophical patterns of her people, though her communication style had become more human as his had incorporated Zalaran elements. Their language, like everything else between them, had evolved into something unique. The door slid open as Director Walsh, now Ambassador Walsh, entered with a delegation of officials from both species. It's time, she announced. The press is assembled, and the Prime Minister is waiting to make the announcement. The ceremony was brief but historic. Standing before representatives from 27 nations and 4 alien species, Elias and Talia were officially designated as heads of the newly formed Interspecies Relationship Bureau. Their first assignment, creating protocols for future cross-species partnerships, both professional and personal. As the first formally recognized human Zalaran bonded pair, your experiences will guide policy for generations, the Prime Minister announced. Your unique connection bridges not just our species, but our understanding of compatibility across the stars. Later, at the reception, Dr. Okafor approached them with excitement barely contained behind his professional demeanor. The latest scan results are remarkable, he told them quietly. The neural synchronization has stabilized in ways we never anticipated. Elias, your brain is demonstrating activity patterns previously observed only in Zolarans, while Talia's neural pathways have adapted to human emotional centers. Is this concerning? Elias asked, though through their bond he could feel Talia's amusement at the question. Concerning? It's revolutionary. Dr. Okafor exclaimed. You're literally evolving together. And the cognitive enhancements are undeniable. Your joint problem-solving abilities test off our established scales. Across the room, Elias noticed two junior staffers, one human, one Centaurian, deep in conversation, their body language indicating mutual interest despite their physiological differences. It's already beginning, Talia observed, following his gaze. Our precedent opens possibilities others will explore. That night, in their shared apartment, now a harmonious blend of human comfort and Zolaran crystalline aesthetics, Elias reviewed applications for their new department. 23 couples had already applied for the pilot program, each representing different combinations of species, occupations, and relationship stages. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Choosing a human rather than one of your own kind? Through their bond, he felt her surprise at the question before she answered aloud. Regret implies error, she said, moving behind him to rest her long fingers on his shoulders. Familiar warmth spread through him at her touch. There was no error in our resonance. Even though your season has passed, he asked. Talia's mating cycle had ended months ago, yet their bond had only strengthened. She made the crystalline sound he now recognized as laughter. The season initiates potential. What follows is choice. Her fingers traced the now familiar pattern up his neck to his temples. Each day, I choose you anew. As their minds synchronized in the evening resonance ritual that had become their daily practice, Elias reflected on how thoroughly his life had transformed. What began as an unexpected government order had evolved into something no protocol could have anticipated, a connection that transcended species, a relationship that was literally rewriting the rules of human-alien interaction. Through their bond, he shared this thought with Talia, feeling her agreement ripple back to him in waves of blue-silver light. Together, they were creating something entirely new, a protocol written not in manuals or diplomatic accords, but in the shared language of two beings who had found unexpected harmony across the stars.